this is Bart Sharp with Becoming Quantum Conscious at United Public Radio Network, UPNRN, and UFO Paranormal Radio Network, broadcasting out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. And I am out of Austin, Texas, where we are enjoying a little bit of clouds amongst this wonderful baking, frying, groundbreaking heat, putting big cracks in the ground. And I am talking to Ali Issac, who is in a totally different world, which I am totally envious of Cavan, Ireland, which, hi, Ali, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
Good, good, good. How is the weather in Cavan today?
It is torrential and has been for, I would say, the last 3 weeks. And it's actually bouncing off the window next to me at the moment. I'm surprised you can't hear it.
Oh my gosh, we're so envious. I'm sure you could love a little sunshine, and it's the crazy world we live in.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Sunshine would be nice.
it would be, and we'd love to send you some. Uh, we had a week or so of nothing but blue sky and hot sun every day, baking everything. So we're both, what we have in common is we spend a lot of time indoors.
Yes, that's true. And we wouldn't think that.
Yeah,
We
we're
think
both.
we think sunshine and blue skies mean you'll be outside all day.
Yes, and you are an outdoor person because you are out at sacred sites in all of these places all across Ireland.
Yeah.
Ali is not only an author, but of course a historian, a guide, mother, and she's also very passionate about all the sacred sites, history, and all of these amazing magical places in Ireland.
Yes.
And just to give you a little bit of a biography about Ali, is that she graduated from Maynooth University. She with class honors, master's degree in history with a special interest in Irish cultural heritage. And she has begun working as an education officer in a museum in Cavan, as well as does tours, but also is I like the word fierce, a fierce writer in Substat on her own page of writing all about the history of Ireland. And there's, when you look at her website, she just has this beautiful paragraph describing her work. And so I'm going to start the show with this little paragraph. It's so Irish. Through word and image, I try to draw the human story from Ireland's landscape and tumbled stones, with a particular focus on the women that history has abandoned and legend only half remembers. Wow. That is so wonderful. Because you are a writer and historian and discoverer of the history of ancient Ireland, and particularly women's role in it.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the written historical record, that women don't really appear in it. And this, I'm talking about the Irish historical record here, that women are only, they're only noted as the wife of, or the mother of, or the daughter of, and they don't actually have a name of their own. And you know, when I visit a place, I try and find out a little bit about the women that might have lived there, or that are associated, the legends that are associated with that place. And then that's what I try and bring to people's attention when in my writing.
Yeah, what a great passionate thing to do. And so you started the Kaliak project, right? Which I want to spell this word because it kind of looks like that word, Kaliak, but it really, let's just confuse everybody. And I'll just spell it out because that's how I get things down. Cailleach. And that's the
Yeah,
Kaliak project.
Kalia. Yeah.
And what got you into taking on such a big endeavor?
Oh, well, it's a very personal journey for me. And the Kaliak is a very old woman, and I'm now in my late 50s. And over the last sort of year, I started to have a lot of issues with transferring into those older years, in other words, the menopause. And I had no older women in my life that I could go to for advice. So I lost my grandmother a few years ago, and my mother has had 2 strokes, and she can't really talk or communicate very well. And I'm the oldest child in my family, and I come from a very small family, so I don't have any aunts or anyone I could turn to. And I just had a bit of a personal crisis, I suppose, and I needed to find something that I could cling on to and to learn from, and just help me get through my experiences. And I looked for advice from other women on social media, for example, and there are some good menopause sites there. And there are also a lot of sites or women on there, older women, giving advice about how you should dress or how you should look or how you should wear your hair. And it was all about how women look. And I just think, are we ever going to get away from that? Is there anything wrong? Is there something so wrong about being your age? And they were saying things like, you should be very careful about what you eat and drink so you don't get menopause belly, and, really crazy things. And I just felt that there had to be more, and I knew I wasn't going to find it from there. I had no older women to turn to in my life. And so for some reason, the Kaliak kept popping into my head. She was an old woman. And I live very close to Loch Crew, which is in Irish Slieve and Kaliak, which is the hill or the mountain of the hag. And she just kept popping into my mind. And I just thought, I'm going to find out a bit more about her. And I've always wondered about mythology.
A geographic reference for this, the hill on the hat, as you said. Did I get that right?
Hill of the Hag.
The hill of the hat. And
Yeah.
this is close to Cavan. And Cavan is west of Dublin, 50 kilometers, something like that?
It takes about just over an hour to drive there.
Okay.
From Dublin.
Yeah. So you're getting into the central region of Ireland, where there are hills, not really mountains.
Mm.
But you sought this as almost like to find advice from the land itself.
Yes, that's a good way of describing it. Yes, because I've always thought that mythology is not just stories for entertainment. I always felt that, these are ways of educating people who didn't read or write. And there are some, you can just take them at face value. I mean, you can look at stories like the Puka and, to try and scare people to stay indoors at night so things couldn't happen to them. Or the water horse who would drag people into the river and drown them. That was to keep children away from rivers and lakes before they could swim. So there's those kinds of basic lessons that you can learn. But I also think that with somebody like the Cailleach and some of the other goddesses, that there's probably deeper stories that we can learn, and you have to really go into the stories and be with them to try and find out what they mean.
And so the Cailleach is really so much about a connection with the water, the stones, the earth, almost as you're getting in touch with elementals.
Yeah, she was supposed to have formed the landscape. She had some big cudgel or some big stick that she beat the land with to shape it. And also she's associated with winter as well, when the landscape is probably at its most barren and its harshest. So that's quite interesting for me. And as I'm kind of entering the winter of my life, I wanted to see what connections I could make within those stories.
And,
And
and another word with that is internal.
yes, it
That
is.
you're going not only internally in the wintertime because you stay at home, but also it's just the nature of women and men as they mature, that their internal world becomes richer.
Yeah. Yeah, you become wiser and you are reputed to be wiser and to have gained knowledge over your lifetime. And I think like one of the first things I wrote about is that I've never really been a winter person. And I dreaded the winter from the solstice. When the summer solstice happened, I knew then that the days were getting shorter. And I always had a bit of a twinge, even though it was still months to go yet of summer. It felt bittersweet to me because I knew winter was on its way. And I didn't want to spend half of my life dreading winter and not enjoying it. So I wanted to be able to live with the cold and the dark and find ways of accepting that. And then I realized that part of the darkness I was afraid of was actually in me and not just about the darkness of the night or the darkness of the winter. And it was just,
What does that feel like?
um, I suppose you could put a well-known name on it and say it's depression, maybe.
Mm.
Um, and anybody who's ever suffered from that knows that it's not very nice. But I wouldn't go so far as to say I was never diagnosed with anything like that. But looking back on how it made me feel, I think there was a slight um, depressive tendency whenever I thought of winter. And I suppose I've grown up in warm countries as a child, so I was never really used to cold winters.
Wow.
And so I just wanted to find ways to live with that and to still enjoy my life
Yes.
within that.
And so the philosophies or following, I guess it's more like following the path, or as we say in the New Age circles, following the energy of the Cailleach was part of your guide.
Yeah, yeah. And I think now looking back, I was probably always a daughter of the Cailleach, really, because um, even as a child, I really loved landscapes, the big landscapes, the wide open spaces. And I remember when I was about 80 years old, I got my first camera and I went out and took pictures, and they were all landscape pictures, pictures of cliffs and, just distant hills and mountains, that kind of thing. And but I never realized it until last year. I was out walking in the Burren with my friend Jenny, and we were talking about religion, and both of us decided that we weren't religious people. And then she said to me, nature is my church. And that really struck a chord in me because I thought, well, what's mine then? And I had thought about that for a long, long time, and last year realised that it was landscape, whether it was natural landscape or the built landscape, historical landscape, and what was in it. So things like how we use the landscape, how we, I don't know. I learned this year how to weave willow, and willow is profuse around my house and where I live. So that's like harvesting from the landscape, something that's being provided for us, and the plants, foraging and medicine, natural medicines, all of those things are part of the landscape. And it's protecting the landscape to make sure that those things are always there for us.
It's kind of like weaving a bit of a poetry of the land and of nature all together. And yet, as you become wiser, you start to see that connection that they all have.
Yeah,
And that's part of the hag's wisdom.
yeah, it is. And I love that expression there. You just said weaving the poetry of the land and the nature together. I think that's lovely.
Mhm.
I might borrow that one.
Fine. Anybody that writes a quote like, I got to read this again. I draw the human story from Ireland's landscape and tumbled stones. If you've ever been to Ireland, there's so much history in the stones,
Mm.
as
If
well as
only they could talk.
only they could talk. Um, Interesting. I went to Ireland to a few years ago to really channel the history of the country, and I really felt like there must be something very old, like the Tuatha Dé Danann, or maybe even the Atlantean culture was there, and it was always coming out of the wells itself, the water.
Mm.
The water seemed to have a very unique memory
Mm.
with it all.
Yeah, because the well of knowledge, for example,
Mm,
with the salmon of knowledge swimming in there, and the story of Boan, for example, trying to gain secret knowledge that was forbidden from her by going into the well. Those stories, and then how the well rose up against her and she was washed out to sea and drowned, and the river was named after her. Those kinds of stories are endemic in Ireland. Water is associated with women, and we have all the holy wells as
and
well.
and it makes you wonder, was this an actual woman? Was this a goddess? Was this a female spirit that was in a physical body or a spiritual body? I mean, what's the
Yeah,
answer to
I've
that?
wondered about that a lot. I mean, I wonder if it could be um, ancestor worship, maybe that a woman went down to the river and she was drowned, and then people always went down to the river to remember her and honor her, or something like that. I mean, I just don't know. But a lovely part of the myth story of Boan is that the Milky Way is supposed to follow the line of the Boyne, the River Boyne, is to replicate that in the sky. And I think that's a lovely idea.
So the River Boyne, um, I've heard the name. Can you describe where that's located?
So it flows past Slane, it flows through Navan, and then it flows east then, and the
Okay.
River Boyne, and it comes out by to the coast by Drogheda.
Okay.
Hmm.
Good to know. It's good to get that geographical vision.
Yeah, it's actually right beside Newgrange. It's the
Okay.
river beside Newgrange.
All right. All right. I got it. There's so many people, at least in the United States, that Irish is hallowed ground, or Ireland is. And although it's such a small country, it has a rich amount of landmarks
Mm.
and history, of course, in special places, all just packed in this tiny country.
Yeah.
We in the States relish it um, with that. And we brought up St. Brigid,
Mm.
and she's always such a mystery because let me just, before we go into St. Brigid, I want to just say, if you do have questions for Ollie, just please get on the chat and send those questions away. Um, I think she can field about anything that you want to bring up. And also, we are United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network out of New Orleans, Louisiana. And you can check us out on Roku on cable, YouTube, Facebook, uh, and other platforms um, across the world. And so we go to Brigid, St.
Mm.
Brigid. And of course, recently I read in one of your Substack articles, which Ali does have a very active and vigorous. I want to say something that has lots of life, that it's just not coming to me. Um, Substat um, program of all of these great articles on history and St. Brigid and other mythology in Ireland. Um, but with St. Brigid, what kind of relationship does she have with the Kaliak?
Well, that's an interesting one because the Cailleach obviously represents winter, and Brigid is associated with spring. Her feast day is on the 1st of February, and that's in Ireland. That's the first day of spring. It's called Imbolc. And so some people think that it might be a different side of the same character, possibly,
Mhm.
or that, I mean, you've probably heard of the Holly King and the Oak King battling for supremacy, and Holly King rules over winter. And I don't think it's anything like that. I think that it's more like two women supporting each other than battling each other for supremacy. And the thing about the Cailleach is she's always described as being really old as a landscape. But to me, a landscape is ageless. And I think she is ageless. I don't think
Yeah.
you can quantify her in terms of age or years or time. And so I have this idea that Brigid is, or the Cailleach is the pregnant mother when everything is gestating in the
Wow.
winter. The stasis of winter is the gestation beneath the ground. And then in the spring is actually after birth has taken place. So, the roots are actually, the plants are already coming up through the ground. So to me, I think Brigid is like the foster mother. So she takes over then and nurtures whatever is growing, whether it's animals or whether it's plants. I think there's some kind of relationship between the two.
So is it almost like she takes the power of the gestated internal pregnant power and then
Mm,
put it into application?
yes, I think the Cailleach is resting because she's been gestating the whole landscape. That takes a lot of energy. I
It
think
does.
she's resting. She's resting for the spring and the summer, and Brigid is taking over, and she's fostering all this life. That's how I see it from my own readings, but I'm not saying that would be a common interpretation.
Well, you have some very interesting history about Bridget. I've never heard because about this, and it's always a mystery to how she became a saint, because she has a history as a Tulutadanon. Uh,
Yeah,
and then when she was born, flame was coming out of her head. She was connected with the sun and the stars, but yet she's very grounded.
yeah,
Uh, quite a quite a mythology there.
yeah. See, I think Bridget was really well loved by the people, and her they didn't want to give her up. You know, when Christianity came, I think there were probably Christians in Ireland for quite a long time, living in small pockets and just getting on with everybody, you know, and not being so much of a problem. But then, round about the times of St. Patrick, it kind of changed then. And I think the Christians are very, very good at subsuming local religions or local beliefs, local goddesses or gods into their own religion. And I think that's probably what happened with Bridget, is that, you know, they kind of took her over because the people didn't want to give Bridget up. And Bridget was really well loved because she had three different aspects. So she was a healer. She was also the patron of poetry. And she was also a master at the forge, which you would think would be quite a masculine,
Yeah.
masculine a skill. Now, some people say it's more of a domestic fire and associated with the hearth, but I think that's probably the Christian influence,
Uh-huh.
because all of the miracles that Saint Brigid performed were domestic. So she made butter that never ever ran out, no matter how much she gave away. And her cows produced limitless supplies of milk. And she healed people. She healed like a child who was deaf and dumb. You know, her miracles were all along that kind. She gave away clothes to people that needed it and food to people. You know, she's very, very of the people and supporting the people and looking after them.
It's
Whereas,
so, and the power of that really came from her womb. That she's a Kaliak. Is that? Am I getting that right?
I don't see Bridget so much as a Kaliak herself. She's a much younger version, I think,
Mm.
or
Uh-huh.
interpretation. I don't know. Um, I don't know. I wouldn't, to me, she doesn't seem like the same character. They seem two distinct characters. But I think maybe if you're thinking about the goddess Brigid and the saint Brigid, that they've been conflated, and the qualities, if she was quite warlike and she, you know, she could make weapons in a forge, for example. I don't think the Christians really wanted women to have that kind of power. They wanted women to be more domestic. So I think the fire that she was master of as, you know, at the forge, I think became the hearth, the fire of the hearth.
Mhm.
But I have to say that has equal importance too, because the fire was so important, you know, to keep that fire lit, to keep people warm, to,
It-
to make food for people.
Yes, and in those days in Ireland, it was plenty cold.
Yes, definitely. You had to be good with the fire. Yeah, you really did. And I always wondered, you know,
Well, it also makes you wonder. Well, before the Christian times come in, were the women, just as able to pick up a sword as the men?
well, there are stories in the myths of women who did. There's what was her name now? There was one woman who she was associated with Finn McCool. She was his lover or his wife, and she was a princess. She was a daughter of Cormac, I think, and she died, but she was a warrior, and she did associate with all the male warriors. And I think the interesting thing is, did they have separate battalions, if you like, which were just women, or did they all mix in? Were they all equal? I don't know. But we have other myths of Niessa or Nessa, which means not gentle. And she raised a war band of 27 warriors, and she went after the man, I think it was Cathbad, who killed her father-in-law. And she raised this band and men, and they followed her into battle. So, there are stories. And of course, Queen Maeve as well went into battle. So there are stories. I think they're kind of hidden away, but they are still there. They haven't gone completely.
Just like the stories that women have been forgotten in history and legend only half remembers.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that is what you're doing on Substack, is bringing these stories out of how they've been forgotten. So, you're obviously quite a researcher, and you're continually researching on those long winters. And as you just stayed inside, you are just stating history and stories to be put out there for others to learn.
Yeah. I don't want it to be forgotten. I love it. And if I love it, then I think other people will too.
Exactly. And it is coming back. It's almost like being able to ground yourself into a history that gives you power. And what would you, when you think about the women of today and the men, what would you really like them to gain from your work and your knowledge?
Oh, I'd really like people to be more connected with the landscape. I am concerned about climate change and what that's doing. And I think so many people are doing such a lot in their own homes, with just simple things like recycling or growing plants and vegetables and things. But that's not enough. We need, the big organizations to get more involved. So,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's all about education, I suppose. And, the more people that learn about these stories and how they can be applied to their own lives and to their own landscapes, the better.
It is. It creates a consciousness and a value for what your country, your culture, and your planet is all about.
Yeah.
And these people were very connected to the earth. They were a part of the earth.
Yeah.
And that really brings me up. I'm always curious with this question because nobody's able to answer it for me about the Tulutadanon.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, could you share a little bit what you know with that group? Just this is more my own personal curiosity.
Well, I mean, I think if you look at some of the battles that they had, say, for example, the battle with the Fomori and with Brez, I think the Danan were cattle rearing people. They followed their cattle around, whereas the Fomori or Brez's people were more agricultural. So I think there was maybe some kind of clash, maybe for land at some point not in the myths, but in the real world, what was really happening in the past. And there's Ireland is an island, and because of that, lots of people would come from other lands to Ireland as well, and see that it was quite fertile. And that could well be that there were two different cultures that were vying for the best land. And one of them may have been agriculture, and one of them, growing crops and cereals, and the other one is following their cattle. And that tradition of following cattle kind of continued right up until the 19th century. You've probably heard of the term "boolie," where the women of the villages used to follow their cows in the summer up to the highland pastures and stay there over the summer. So they had a real kind of female women's community. So that was definitely something that could have been explored in those stories of the Danann. I mean, they were meant to be powerful people. They had like supernatural powers. They were meant to be very tall and very beautiful. They had blue or green eyes and red or blonde hair. And what archaeology has shown us is that Indigenous Irish people were probably quite dark-skinned and dark-haired with blue eyes, which is quite a striking combination in itself. Yeah, and they were supposed to be immortal, but they weren't. They were long-lived. So they could be killed by a disease, or they could be killed in battle.
Yeah. It also makes you think that even though cows like green pastures and stuff, but they must have been more connected to the forest and the spirits of the forest and had that type of communion as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably part of how those stories came about, because Ireland was very heavily wooded. And so these new people were coming and finding their way around Ireland on boats on the rivers. And that's how they were finding their way around. So maybe there was some kind of conflict between these new people and the people that were already in Ireland at the time, because they all wanted the fertile land.
Wow. So when do you think this is happening? What century?
And probably, I would say probably like Bronze Age, or even earlier than that.
Okay.
And that's where these myth stories could have originated from.
All right.
Possibly. There's no way of proving any of that, because
Yeah.
none of those stories were written down until the 6th or the 7th century by Christian monks. And that's another reason why I think the Cailleach is not very well known, because she's associated with creating the landscape. And that's a very powerful thing. And the Christian monks had their own origin story already, when a male god created the world in 7 days. So they do not want to be telling the story of a powerful woman who did it instead. So I think she kind of was ignored. But the myth sort of carried on in the oral culture, in the folklore. And academics will say there was never a Cailleach before the 19th century because there's no stories about her. Well, there's loads of stories about her, but they are all in folklore. They were never written down by the monks. And I can't blame the academics. They have to have evidence of any theories they're going to propose. And they can't propose that because there's no actual evidence they can turn to, except when you look at the landscape again. If you all go back to the landscape, because it always goes back to the landscape, there are so many places in Ireland that are associated with the Cailleach, and they have her name. Her name is in the landscape, like Loch Rue, which in Irish is Slieve na Cailleach. And then we have the Hag's Bed, which is in Cork, I think, and then we have the Hag's Head, which is at the cliffs of Moher. And there's other places too. And there's so many other goddesses who are named in the landscape, like Shannon with the River Shannon, and the Paps of Anya, which is the hill, the breast of Anya. They're two hills which look like a female figure. And, Boyne is associated with Boan. So there's lots of places. There's lots of evidence of the
And
goddess
it's
and Cailleach, I believe.
yes, and it's that the feminine always is a representation that the land gives to anyone that is connected to it. And it seemed like that was a lot with Brigid, though. There, as you talk about it, there seemed to be a lot of parallels with the Jesus story, and that he healed people. He made water into wine. She made something more practical, cheese and butter, but and very fertile cows. But they both had a element of fertility that had infinite like proportions.
Yeah.
I can see why those monks didn't want to write about that.
Yes. I can too.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And if we think about people in the modern age that really wish to get in touch with someone like Brigid in that fertility, could you give them any advice or direction?
Oh, well, I suppose like I'm not sure whether that would be my place to do that. But for me, learning from the Cailleach started off with learning as much about her as I could, and then applying that to my life. And I think that is probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
And it's different for everyone. It's a different journey for everyone.
It
And also, something that's important for me is to go to the places that are associated with this person. So I've been to a lot of places that are associated with various different goddesses because that interests me. And not just goddesses, also historical characters too.
yes.
And you just get a real sense of someone when you go to the place and walked where their feet walked,
Yes.
especially if you take your shoes off and do it.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. And there's so many Mary Wells in Ireland.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, well, is that also had a history that maybe it was Brigid at another time?
Of the wells, you mean, the holy
Yeah,
wells?
yeah.
Yeah, so I think what happened is that because there are so many wells that are associated either with Patrick or with Brigid, and I think they were just trying to change the connections for the local people. And it was, Brigid and Patrick are the most well-known Christians. So
Yeah.
they use their names. I don't know if in the past those all of the holy wells would have been associated with different gods or goddesses, because we don't have that. We don't have that information. So we know certain places are, but most of the holy wells aren't anymore. They're just associated with St. Patrick or St. Brigid or some other saint who actually they weren't saints really. They were just holy people.
Yes.
So yeah, I
Um,
think that's
almost
yes.
like a title to place upon
Yeah,
something to give it importance
yeah,
to help people remember.
yeah.
Yeah.
And something else as well, which really reinforced the dominance of Patrick and Brigid was in the 7th century. There was a real power struggle between the Church of Armagh and the Church of Kildare, and they were both wanted control of the church in Ireland, and they were trying to model themselves as the centre. And there was a big power struggle between them. And so at that time, there were a lot of hagiographies, the life stories of the saints written up with all their wonderful miracles, and trying to prove that, no, Patrick's better than Brigid. No, Brigid's better than Patrick. It's just obviously it's more serious than that. But that, I think, probably had a big influence in imprinting their names across.
Yeah, and I just loved your comparison of the two in your Substack articles of that. A lot of the miracles that Patrick was about creating power, victories in battle, chasing the snakes out of Ireland,
Yeah.
or driving them out. Whereas Brigid was all about growth,
Yes.
providing.
Yeah. She was all about helping people and looking after people. And, Patrick was fighting demons and, driving out snakes, that kind of thing. So I think that Brigid was probably quite well loved because of what she did.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Patrick's devotion probably came out of fear, I would imagine, with all his aggressive adventures.
Aggression does attract fear.
Yeah.
It's just kind of natural that you're going to be afraid when you're going to be in fights.
Yeah.
And if you are a young woman or a man, and you wish to connect with something, or some spirit of Brigid, you can do that. There's a lot of different ways you can, writing your own story, and like Ali has described, spending that time in your womb space or internal, and feel what that feels like to have the God that's alive in you.
Mm.
I think that's what is so inviting when you live in a country like Ireland and you're facing this long winter. How do you nourish your internal world?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's such an important part that we can learn from the Irish as and Brigid, is that they had that. There was a part of your legend that you said that Brigid was born with like fire, or that with she was connected with the sun, and that fire was coming out of her top of her head.
Yeah.
What's that?
So the story is that she was born on the doorstep of the house, which
Wow.
means that she was neither in the house or out of the house. She was kind of in both. So she was in the nature and she was in the domestic. And she had, when she was born, there was like a column of light or fire that extended up into the heavens from her head. And also, the only way she could be nourished was by milk from a red-eared cow, a white cow with red ears, that's kind of meant to be. I'm sure it's a metaphor for something, because you see it quite a bit. You see it with dogs as well, red-eared dogs, red-eared cattle. I just think there's something there that we don't understand. But anyway, she was
Yeah.
reared on this milk, and I think she, she was too holy, too sacred for mother's milk or anything else. She had to get it from these magical creatures instead. So it's all very cryptic.
Yeah, I think that's a good word, cryptic,
Yeah,
and that there's a lot of hidden meanings in there with it,
yeah,
and meanings with that. But it does let you know that she's connected with the earth, but also with the sun
yeah,
that nurtures the earth.
yeah, yeah. And I really like this idea of the fire, because we obviously got the forge and the hearth. There was a fire in her, obviously, that she was born with, that was also of the heavens as well. And she was the patron of poetry. So she would have been one of her name, the name Brigid. Some people think that it's translated as the fiery arrow of inspiration, and I see that as being another aspect of the fire. The blazing lightning strike of inspiration, which I think we've all felt that at some point in our lives. And that's something that I really like
It it
about
it
Bridget.
is, and that she brought that across the land and had such compassion with it,
Mm, yeah,
and that's so much about uh, some of the lessons we can take from Bridget and bring
yeah,
into this modern world.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. See, they definitely relate. These stories definitely relate to the modern world today.
Yeah, sometimes you just really need to read them and see what comes up in you
Mm,
as you hear the story and how it inspires you or what intuition springs forth from the concepts.
yeah,
And it teaches you about yourself through that patience to
yeah,
slowly read a story like that,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. And then we can learn from each other too, because we'll all might have a slightly different take on it or interpret it differently, and that opens our eyes again.
Yeah,
So
it
yeah,
does. It does. Wow. We're starting to come to an end, Ali. It was so wonderful having you on the show. And if there was anything that you could just say in a like a 30-second sound bite of, but also I want to just remind people as you think of your ending 30-second sound bite about what you would like to leave with everybody. But I want to say that um, Ali can be found on, and that be Ali, Ali, Isaac, Asaac,
yes,
and you can find her articles on Substack. Are you thinking of a book anytime in the future?
I might be.
Okay.
There might be something going on there in the background at the moment that I can't actually mention just yet.
All right. All right. Something's brewing. This woman is not. The only time she's still is when she is contemplating her internal journey, which you have to be still for that. But something's always going on with this person, and bringing more magic and acknowledgement of the power that women are throughout history.
Mm.
Ali, any part in party wisdom you want to share with the audience?
I would say get out into your neighborhood and walk around your neighborhood and get connected with the land around you. And if you live in a city and it's built up, find the nearest park or the nearest hill or the nearest river, and just get connected with it and see what comes up for you.
Hmm. That's wonderful advice that we could all share throughout the world. As we are on United Public Radio and UFO Paranormal Radio, we are broadcast all over the world. some of the most interesting countries have a high listening audience. It's not always about the United States. We have a big UK, Irish audience, as well as European audiences, as well as United States. So we're everywhere in essence. And we're also seen on Roku, Facebook, YouTube, and that would be United Public Radio and UFO Paranormal Radio Network. And my name is Bart Sharp, and this is Becoming Quantum Conscious. And I like thank you so much for being on the show today and imparting all of this wonderful information and wisdom.
It's been a pleasure being on the show and chatting to you, Bart. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. And we all wish you the best, and we hope to see you next week on Wednesday at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. Until then, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.